Okay, right, let's get rid of this PowerPoint slide then. I'm not a big one for PowerPoint slides, as some of you may already know, so let's get rid of that. And then we will crack on with the presentation. Okay, very messy desktop you're seeing there, which was unintentional. Okay, so welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining promptly and and indeed for joining us today. The focus of the presentation is very much around the new version of Safran Risk, version 25.1. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that that I'm actually got 0.01-beta 2. So I got sent this earlier today. There's a few kind of like little minor tweaks and bug fixes and so on, which is very, very normal with any new software release. So rather than wait until tomorrow, which would have been the sensible thing to do, before giving a presentation to a load of people, I thought I'd install it this morning. So fingers crossed, everything will go all right. But as always with kind of software presentations, there's always a possibility something will go wrong. But hopefully nothing too major at least. So my name is Doug Oldfield. I'm one of the directors at the Ferryfield Group. We work very, very closely with Safran, do a lot of work with them. We kind of work as a distributor, trainer, consultant, an integrated part of the sales team sometimes, all sorts of stuff. But Ferryfield is obviously a separate organisation. So we're kind of one of Safran's platinum partners. If you want to find out more about Ferryfield, give us a shout and let us know. I'm assuming as you've signed up, you probably know a little bit about us. And as there are a grand total of about 30 things that I need to cover today, and the fact that I've got an appalling track record at getting through anything more than about 5 items, I should probably stop with the introductions and carry on with the presentation. So what I'm doing, so some of you might have already seen the customer release notes. If not, they're available on the Safran website, or you can ping us an email, and we're happy to send them across to you. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of do this in an unusually linear fashion for myself. So I'm going to kind of work through steps for each tab and talk about what's new, give you a little bit of context around it. So I'm going to start off with the home screen, where there's not actually anything visible and new to see on here whatsoever, but there are a number of different things apparently that are kind of under the hood or under the bonnet, depending on what side of the Atlantic you might be sitting on, that the development team have made to the software to make it more efficient, to make processing faster, some security updates and so on. Now, I'm not a developer, so I'm not going to be kind of going into any of those things in any detail, but it's really about kind of making sure that modern security standards are all met. I think there's additional support for particular types of Microsoft Entra authentication and so on. But aside from that, there's nothing new on this actual screen to talk about. So the global risks. Whilst there are technically a couple of things which will affect this, I'll be talking about those in the context of the project risk tab instead. So where we're going to start off today is the risk calendars. Now, don't know if how many people use the risk calendars who are on the call, but I use them quite extensively. And one of the major frustrations with the old version of Safran, love it though I did, was that it was very, very difficult to do any kind of editing at all with the calendars once you created them. So you couldn't like group them differently. You couldn't change the name. It was really difficult to do anything at all. You had to, if you were going to do that, and this was something I never advise customers doing, you'd have to export it to XML. And then you'd edit the XML file and re-import it, and it wasn't very easy. So what Safran have done is they've made it a lot easier to make any changes. And really, the main thrust of this hangs off around this new thing here, which I'm going to call the RCBS, the Risk Calendar Breakdown Structure, which for those of you familiar with Safran, which I'm assuming most people on the call are. You might recognize this from things like the cost breakdown structure tab, where we have a breakdown structure. And what this new grouping tab allows us to do is to create new kind of categories of calendars or groupings of calendars where we might want to save things. So I'm just going to add in a new one here. I'm going to click add, and I'm going to just call this one, I'm going to call it convergence, because I'm one of those people who obviously had too much time on their hands and wanted to do some convergence testing to see what was the difference between 100 samples versus 1,000 versus 10,000 samples and so on. We're not going to go into that today, but if anybody wants to journey down that particular rabbit hole with me, please feel free to send me private message afterwards, and I'd be happy to do that with you. So we can set up the risk calendars. Sorry, the grouping, and then once we've done that, we can then just kind of drag and drop whatever it is that we want to into those. So we can then, if we also want to, we can now edit names and so on as well. And if something was in the wrong place, we just pick it up and drag it and put it somewhere else. So something which is really potentially quite useful if you use the calendars quite a lot, which, as I said, I certainly do. We can also, even if we particularly wanted to, we can even kind of go down the colouring route, which I've probably not got a particularly good track record of making things look halfway decent. But if we do that, now I've got my kind of top level, and I've got the level below, and so on. Again, probably not all that much use for most people, but it is there as something just to kind of help you see the difference between a level of the structure and the actual calendars themselves. So the only other thing I think that's changed on this particular screen, I'm not going to do this live for obvious reasons, is that you can now delete multiple calendars in one go. So if you control click, shift click doesn't work, it's just control click, highlight the calendars you want to delete, click delete calendar, and then they will be gone forevermore. But yeah, I'm not going to do that now. So that's the risk calendars and what's new. So let's now look at the schedule tab. So schedule tab, of course, is one of the busiest tabs where we spend an awful lot of time if we're doing anything to do with schedule risk analysis. And there are, I think there's three kind of main changes to this. So first of all, there has been some new fields added. So first of all, I think most of the main fields that we're going to be talking about are to do with the risk analysis side of things. But there have been a number of different fields being added on the project side, which I'll touch on briefly in a moment. But what I'm going to do, I'm just going to show some of these new fields that have come in. So I'm just going to right click up on the top, go to columns, and then I'm going to click add. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to type in RISK, which then kind of obviously brings me to anything beginning with the word risk. And actually, as a little tip, if you are searching for columns and it's just something to do with the simulation, whether it's something to do with the inputs or the outputs, typically they start with the word risk. And so you can see I've got a number of different ones in here. And the main differences here are that we can now bring in there's a particular field which is the finish date probability, and I'll run a simulation in a moment and I'll show you how that works. But the idea is that when we run a simulation, we've got lots of risks and opportunities and uncertainties. We might want to be able to see in the Gantt chart what's the probability that we're going to be able to finish our phase or our activity according to whatever the deterministic finish date was in our original schedule. And we've always been able to do that in the distribution graph tab, but it's actually quite nice to be able to see it in the schedule as well, which we'll see in a moment. You'll also see that historically we didn't have any cost fields in here. I think there used to be like the risk mean cost and the risk standard deviation cost, which is pretty much no use to anybody at all. And now you can see that whatever focus percentiles that I've got set up, so in my case I think it's the 50, 80, 90, 95 and 100, you can see that there is a corresponding entry which allows me to show the cost of that as well. So if I've got costs in my schedule, I can now see that in the schedule view tab. So let me run a quick simulation and I will show you where that risk probability of finishing on date, or whatever it was called. What was it actually called? Risk finish date probability, where it comes from. So there we go. So so you'll see on the graph that I've got on the screen, after I've just put it after each of these different phases actually. So rather than putting it for every activity, I've just chosen to customize my Gantt a little bit and show what's the probability of meeting any of my objectives for each of these phases compared to my original plan. And how I do that is if I go to my symbols tab. Then if I go and find wherever I put that, which is on the summary, then you'll see that here I've added a little bit of text saying success equals, and then that field is the risk finish date probability, and then afterwards I put a percentage sign on there because that's not in the actual in the text that comes out, and then that's what's driving that bit of text that's showing after those. So again, Is it going to absolutely fundamentally change your relationship with Safran Risk? Probably not, but it's a nice thing to be able to kind of add onto the graph to add a little bit more information on there. And as you can see, I'm a fan of annotating these graphs with a considerable bit of information as well. So as well as the probability of finishing a phase, I've also got some information around how often my activities fall on the critical path. The orange text on the right hand side is the different risks that occurred for a particular activity or when I ran a simulation. And then we've also got the different confidence intervals down here as well. So the blue is my deterministic duration or activity. And then I've got my finish dates at different confidence levels, with the green is the 50 to 80, the orange is the 80 to 90, and so on. So for me at least, I think the more you play with these sorts of things, the more information you can actually pull out, and the addition of these new fields gives even more capabilities in that regards. So the only other thing then, besides the costs and the risk finish date, is the ability to use there's a whole load more user fields that have now been added into Safran. So here, for example, I think previously there might have been 10 or 12 or 30 or something. It was certainly not 100 different fields, for example. So in the event you want to start using a lot more user-defined fields, which again is a fairly niche activity, why you might want to have more than about 10 or so. But if you do, you're now catered for within Safran Risk with a lot more fields that are available. So that's the what's new on the schedule tab. So schedule warnings. Now there isn't actually anything new with the schedule warnings tab exactly, because it's been depreciated or deprecated, and this is actually going to be replaced with the new schedule health tab that we're going to be talking about in a moment. But one of the kind of the major frustrations that people had, myself very much included, had with the old schedule warnings tab was that we had a flat list of things, but there wasn't really the ability to see much information about what those things were. And so in the previous release, which was I think 22.2.51, which I think it wasn't a regular kind of service pack release. It was something which was kind of made available to a few customers only, kind of just before the new version came out. This kind of ignore hammocks and ignore milestones was added. Now these things save so much time from the old tab, but they only came in just before the new tab has been made available. But if you do still want to use this old tab, you've probably not seen these before, so I thought I'd just cover those very quickly. Now, whilst this tab was something which was it served a necessary purpose. When we import a schedule, we want to know what are the different things which are maybe going to cause us some problems when it comes to running a schedule risk analysis. So it was an absolutely necessary tab. But if you had a big schedule and you had a long list of warnings, there was all sorts of, it took a long time to navigate through them, to check them all off. And it was very difficult to really understand exactly what those activities were without right clicking on them and going to the schedule to look at them, all of which took a much longer time than you'd have wanted if you had like 500 or 1,000 warnings on here. So so the Safran's answer to that is this new wonderful schedule health tab, which I absolutely love personally. So what this does is this obviously it takes the same information pretty much, but it, rather than it having a reporting it in terms of a flat list, we have this very nice interactive dashboard that we can drill down onto, and it's much easier to interpret and find out what's important. So just so you know, it actually ships with two different types of schedule health test. So I'm going to come back and talk about a Safran Risk Ready test in a moment, but we also have the 14-point DCMA check, which is also pre-shipped with the tool, and the DCMA check, it checks for different things to the Safran Risk Ready check, which I'll talk about in a moment. But if any of you ever do need to do a 14-point DCMA check, you've got that availability within here. So we've got these two different tools, and I'm going to explain how this whole tab works in the context of the other tool, because I think it's going to be more relevant for most people. But just so you're all kind of aware, I'm going to take a gulp of my tea before I get too cold. Just so you're all aware, there are, although there's just two tests in this schedule health area that ship or come with the software out of the box, I think Fred, the lead developer and product owner, said that they will probably be creating more. But you've also got the ability to create your own tests as well. So the Safran Risk Ready test and the DCMA check, what they're really checking for is a list of criteria, and then they're looking for any potential issues with the schedule, which kind of fall outside of the rules laid down by those criteria. So we've got all these different kind of metrics and tests which come with the tool, and so each of the metrics can then be combined into a bespoke test of your own choosing. So if neither the DCMA or the Safran Risk Ready test quite do it for you, you've always got the ability to create your own ones afterwards. But if we go back, and I'll just kind of explain, I'll give you a little bit of a tour through how this works. First of all, let's swap back to the Safran Risk Ready test. So one of the key challenges, one of the first things that we need to do when we first get a schedule for doing any kind of schedule risk analysis is to make sure that the schedule is in a fit state and ready to go. Because if the schedule's not in good health, then it means that any results that we generate after our schedule risk analysis are potentially not as robust as we might like them to be. So the Safran Risk Ready test is really designed to highlight those elements of a schedule which might potentially cause us some problems when it comes to doing a QSRA. And so what we have a number of different categories up here, grouped together. So constraints, as late as possible, lags, any links which aren't finished to start, if there's any missing logic, and if there's any progress out of sequence. So we have a score up at the top, and then down below, what we can then see is, first of all, we can resize all these different windows, and I'm working on a relatively large monitor here because my eyes are not as young as they used to be, so I'm not exactly sure how this is going to render on different screens. But you can resize and move things around, or you can take the dashboard off if you want to declutter a little bit, and so on. So you've got some flexibility around how this all looks. But underneath the dashboard itself, what you can see is our WBS. And so what's really nice about this is that we can drill down into it. So we can look at the score of the overall project, which of course is the same score as I've got up there. Or if I then go down to the next level, then you'll see that each of these different phases have now got their own score as well. So for example here, what are these? Oh, these are milestones up at the top that I should probably reorder somewhere so they're hidden somewhere else. But what we can see here is that each of these first few phases seem to be in reasonably good shape. I've got something that's been identified in this reconstruction phase, which means that I haven't got a full score of 100%. And what I can then do, I can open that up, and then I can go and search down and find out exactly what that might be. So the items that are in red, those bars that are in red, are the activities which are on my deterministic critical path, and we'll come back and talk about the critical index in a moment. But you know, I can see exactly whereabouts in my WBS the issues are arising, and so I've got some kind of a problem with my archaeological dig, and in this case, if I then scroll across, this matrix on the right hand side is then, well, first of all, we've got a count of the number of issues. So in the overall project, I've got 7 issues. In this particular phase and this particular activity, I've got 1 issue. And then if I look at the matrix on the right hand side, I can then see whereabouts that issue falls. And in this case, it's to do with there being an as late as possible constraint around this. And if I then have a look down in the bottom right hand corner down here, I then see a little bit more information about that. So I can see that there is, and you've got a little triangle with a first aid sign there, something that needs attention, which I've not actually noticed before, but I quite like that. I can see the activity, and again, I can always go and jump to the schedule to see this activity. But here, I'm being told that this is the activity, archaeological dig, something to do with the as late as possible. And at this point, I can either leave it here and in order to then send back the whole list of problems to my planner, or maybe what I'm going to do, I'm going to say that actually in this case I'm not too worried, which is not the sort of thing is going to reassure anybody in particular on a schedule. But when I do that, what you'll see is that now this particular activity has gone to 100%, and I've got 0 issue that is open. There is a bracket afterwards that's saying there was 1 issue originally, but because I've now accepted that, I've now got 0 open issues. So I get to see this kind of quite nice dashboard and see exactly whereabouts these things fall. So if I scroll down a little bit further, let's find something with a few different things in there maybe. Let's have a look, see. I wish all my schedules were perfect, but in some cases they're not. So let's have a little look at this. This is my sales phase here. And again, over on the right-hand side, you can see that I've got various different activities and some information about those. And so when I close those little arrows down, the high level note is that there's some missing logic, and I've got a link type which is not finished to start. Then if I open that up, it tells me what type of missing logic there is. So it's no successors, and I've got a start to start link type rather than a finish to start. And again, we can kind of go through and start to kind of tick things off and say whether we're okay with them or not. Over on the left-hand side, I then get a count of the a list of the types of metric that we're looking at, a count of the number of issues, and I also get to see things like if there's a particular threshold in place. So when we set up the tests, we can set up a threshold as to whether something is a pass or fail. And just so you know, a pass or fail, it's not going to stop us running a simulation, but it's a red flag. It's saying if you're going to proceed with this without first checking it or doing something about it, it might cause you some problems. Where if something's green, then the implication is maybe it's not so bad. Now, I mentioned a moment ago about the fact that we can see these little red boxes for the critical activities. Now, one thing that's really helpful about this is that if we set up any filters on my schedule screen here, then they're always pulled through to the other areas like risk mapping and so on. But we can also pull them through to schedule health. Now, one of the things that I'm a big fan of, and I'm not going to show it now, is performing a stress test. So when we first receive a schedule, stress it. Change the inputs by a certain amount and see what happens to our critical path during a simulation. And in doing so, when we do that type of activity, what we're able to calculate is how often our activities are on the critical path, which is why we've got this critical index field here. But if I was to just load that filter up, and let's go for critical sometimes. So these are the activities which are on the critical path some of the time, but not all the time. So more than 0, less than 100%. And actually, if you then go and have a look at the schedule health over here, what I can see is that these metrics, the counts, dashboards, all of the information here has been updated and is now just referencing those filtered activities. So again, if we kind of take a step back, when we have a massive schedule and we're wondering where on earth to start, we've got thousands of schedule health warnings and so on. What can be a really good test is to find out which activities are either always on the critical path or sometimes on the critical path, and then that's the logical starting place. Because rather than starting with things which are never on the critical path, even if it changes by plus or minus 50 days or whatever, we set up a filter, and then this schedule health is then it gives us a more targeted starting point of the activities to look at, because sometimes we haven't got infinite time to test all these things out, and so we have to take a pragmatic approach. And so being able to use the filters in conjunction with the schedule health tab is really useful and powerful as well. Okay, so that's the schedule health. I think that's it. So let's go to the project risks. So there's only a couple of minor little things on here to talk about. So the first is something which I think was actually in the previous version, but you couldn't see it, which is not altogether helpful, which is that if I was to put, oops, what have I just done? Just clicked some kind of Windows shortcut to open up Bing, which is probably Microsoft just trying to get me to look at Bing. But anyway, so historically in this view, we haven't been able to see any decimal places. So the numbers here have always been rounded. Now, previously you could put in decimals, I believe, but they still showed as rounded. Whereas now, if I wanted to, I can put in a decimal place. very minor change, but as this is all about what's new in 25, it's worth communicating these things. And the other thing as well, which is something that I really like, is that we've always had the ability to assign a color to the different risks. Now, this isn't some glorified red, amber, green where we've got every color under the sun and we're going to put that on some kind of weird, wonderful heat map. It's more that whenever we create a new risk, what Safran does, it automatically assigns some kind of a color to it from a pick list. What some customers have historically done is they've liked to color different types of risk different colors. So you might have your calendar risks might be red, your supply chain risks might be blue, your internal HR risks might be orange or whatever. And whilst we've been able to see those things in the risk mapping tab and some of the other reports, what we haven't been able to do is to sort on them. And so now what we can do a color sort. I'm not quite sure how the color sort happens, but it at least groups all the things that are the same color together. My recollection is that then that also then applies to the risk mapping tab here as well. So what we can do, we can group things by, if we wanted to give things a color, we can group them together. And then when it comes to doing our risk workshops, it just makes that process a little bit easier. Now, there are obviously other ways of doing that as well. We've got some kind of, you could use text and so on to do the same sort of thing, but it's a little tweak that I personally am quite pleased it's there. But again, probably not something for absolutely everybody. So let's go on to the risk mapping tab. And of course, just to finish that bit off, those changes have now been applied on the global risks tab as well as the risk project risk tab as well. So let's go to risk mapping. So what have we got? A few little bits and pieces on here. So first of all, historically, you didn't have any opportunity to change the names of these things. So you were able to see the whatever the risk ID was, you could see that, and then if you put your mouse on it and hovered, you had a little whatever it's called, Java applet or whatever it is, popping up a tooltip, that's it, which then tells you what the description of the risk is, but that was it. Whereas now in the options, you've got the ability to change to the description or ID or ID and description, whichever kind of way around you want to see it. So a nice, a nice minor little change, but something which is quite useful. What else have we got? So let me just click on an actual activity. Let's go for this one down here. Okay. So some of you probably quite familiar with Safran's override function, which is where if we've assigned a risk to an activity, we can customize the parameters around it on an activity by activity basis. So we might have a risk which is applied to 10, 20, 30 activities, but actually we might want to change either the likelihood or the impact of the risk just for one particular activity. So we've always been able to use this override button. And so which one have we got? I want to change in the strategic direction. So I'm trying to see exactly where it is on here. Oh, okay, that orange one there. So I'm on this blue activity here, the one that's highlighted blue, fabricate engine subframe. And you can see this is my subcontractor enters liquidation risk, which wasn't the one I was going to use, but is that the right one? Let's have a look. See, change in strategic direction. Oh no, it's the one. It's the one next to it. Okay. So I've got a tick box there, which indicates that I've assigned this particular risk to that activity. But maybe I don't think there's a 25% probability. Maybe I think there's a 23% probability, or maybe I think there's going to be a 91% impact rather than a 90% impact. And what happens is that now in my matrix over here, I can now see at a glance which risks have been overridden. So it's just a little quick thing to be able to visually see whereabouts we've used that override function if we do use those. And whilst we're down here as well, some people, I've always really loved this this kind of risk mapping matrix. I think it's so easy to use. I like the visuals of it. But if you're needing to assign lots of risks to a particular activity and you've got lots and lots and lots of risks in your risk register, scrolling back and forth was maybe a little bit cumbersome for some people. So now we've also got the ability down here in the risk tab to click on map. And then we have the same sort of list that you might be familiar with in the cost breakdown structure in the cost model as well. So we've got a little pick list here, which allows us to kind of add and remove lists. Add and remove risks quickly and easily, and we can control click and so on with that as well. That's the risk mapping tab. Okay, so let's go on to the cost module now, and my bit of paper where I've got my little notes or list has fallen over, so I just need to restack that. Okay, so a few bits and pieces here. So first of all, and you can see it on the screen, we've got this new contribution column. Now this is a slightly messy model with costs and revenues in it, so it's a little bit confusing to look at here, but what this is showing us is showing us what percentage of our total is being driven by particular inputs, so particular costs. We can now see what their percentage contribution is to the overall. Now I'm assuming, although I haven't actually tested this, and this is the bit where I'll have a little look. See if I go to the cost model. Can I go to the cost model? You can see that actually that updates when we're running a simulation as well, which is quite neat. I hadn't actually seen that before, but it does. And down here we can also see that updating live down here as well. So we've got the contribution column there, which is quite nice. Now let's have a look. So the other changes then, the main other changes here are to be found under this grouping area. So one of the big things historically with Safran Risk is that we had two different ways to look at costs. Either our costs were driven by our schedule with a resource loaded schedule, or our costs were driven by whatever we had in this cost module here, tab here. Whereas reasons why you might use both. If you've got a resource loaded schedule and you've got all your cost of your resources in the schedule, then you wouldn't necessarily want to have to recreate those within this cost model. But in the cost model, there's all sorts of extra things that we can do, particularly using things like variables and there's more creativity. We can use formula, whereas we can't really do any creative modeling, particularly when we're being driven by WBS. So the cost breakdown structure, or this cost model, had a lot more flexibility, but some customers had resource loaded schedules. And so what Safran have done in this new version is that they've added a little button here to add schedule cost. And so although I haven't really got many costs in my schedule, if I click on that, and I think it's up here, I'll just drag it up at the top. I've now got a new line item in here, and you can see I've got the three little bars. If you can actually, if I unhighlight it, it's easier to see. I've got those three little blue bars indicating it's coming from the schedule. And when I click on OK, then what you'll see is I've got a new element up at the top of my cost breakdown structure, which is this schedule cost. And again, if I then run a simulation, whatever costs I've got from the schedule will be coming in to my cost model, and they'll form part of the simulation just like anything else. So if I was to click on complete, let's have a little look at that just to kind of evidence how that works, or show how it works. Previously, I might have seen my schedule cost under the scheduled results up here, looking at the cost tab. So I've got the various results over there with a P90 of 15.6 million. If I now go and look at my results that come from my cost breakdown structure, and I go and have a look at my schedule cost, I've got that exactly the same histogram there, 15.63 million. So, but I've also then got a mix of other things, various revenues and costs in this particular model underneath as well. So hopefully that's going to be something which is going to be quite useful to some of our clients. So let me remove that for now. Oh, the other thing as well on this column is that if anyone's built various models in here where you might want to repeat elements of the structure. There wasn't an easy way to do that. You could export to Excel, you could manipulate it in Excel and re-import it, but it was a little bit kind of time consuming. And so what we're able to do now is we're able to essentially copy part of a structure. So let's copy my costs, and then let's go and paste it down here. And so now I've got this extra, I've got this the elements from my from further up the schedule, the structure have now been copied en masse within their hierarchy and pasted down here. So just something which is quite useful to be aware of if you have ever had any frustrations about creating and duplicated cost structures. Okay, so that's the changes on the cost tab. So let's have a little look at the correlations tab next up. How long have I got? 23 minutes. Doing reasonably well, I think. So the correlations. So in order to what's the word? In order to activate this next thing, you need to go to the options cog, and there's this little option here that says show activity path. Now, sometimes with these options, it's not always easy to understand exactly what they do. But if you tick this show activity path, and actually you've got a little option, a little note here says this allows filtering on the path. What that allows you to do is to then see your whatever kind of WBS activity path you've got in its entirety. And so historically, when you wanted to build any correlations, if you wanted to correlate multiple activities within the same phase, it was a bit clunky. It took more time to do. Whereas now, of course, because I've got the activity path shown, if I wanted to, I don't know, correlate activities just in my design phase, by having that, by enabling that activity path and showing that row filter, it now makes that much easier to navigate through the correlation matrix. And I'm sure everyone's a massive fan of building correlations and correlation matrices, so you'll be pleased to see that's now got a little bit easier. Okay. So the Analyze tab, I don't think there's any changes on the Analyze tab. So if we go to the distribution graph next up, let's kind of focus on this a little bit. So there's a few different elements going on here. So first of all, what we're able to do is to customize the titles in the reports. Now, why would you want to do that? Some of you might be asking. And then hopefully the answer is now apparent on the screen, where you have a title that says cost of, costs and revenues, which makes no sense to anybody at all. So what we've got now is the ability to customize the titles, and we can do this in a few different ways. So if you go to the options cog, and then, so where am I? I'm on my cost options over here. You'll see then we've got things like the title, the frequency title over here, the x-axis title. So we can basically customize anywhere where we see any different words. We can change what they're called. So the main title here, I can instead call this costs and revenues. And now I've got a title that makes some sense up there. So we can either label the titles according to a bit of tech, but the problem with doing that is that then is that whatever I'm looking at, that text now stays exactly the same. So if you're just generating and reporting on one graph, maybe that's not an issue. But if you're actually generating on lots of things, maybe here, instead of saying cost and revenues, I just want to see my revenues, or here I just want to see my costs. You can see down the bottom that we've got some options around how we can, rather than needing to type text in manually, these are different elements or variables that can be used. So for example, if I was to click on, or just hold them clicking on, let me see if I can copy and then paste that onto here, element, then what that's now showing is whatever I'm looking at in my model, that's now being shown on the graph. So the title of it, and again, there's some other options here as to whether we want to show. I've never done this before, but we can also then start to choose exactly what we want to see on there. So there's this new element of customization, which I think is really useful. So we can there's various things we can call things, but I don't think I probably need to talk about all of those. But we can also change name things like frequency and cumulative frequency as well. Now the other thing as well is that there's now there's some extra elements that are included in this output options. So these output options up at the top, these are they're common to all of the different graphs that we're looking at. But now there's been a few things that have been added so that we've got these additional elements of commonality, so we don't have to go through and make some changes to each and every one of them. These are the defaults that we set up once, and then those defaults are then will then be shown on all the graphs, so we don't have to do it for everything, which is nice. Next up, so at the moment, what you'll see is that we've got these 4 different tabs down here. We've got the finish date, start date, duration, and cost. But also in this new version is the ability to calculate our float. Now, by default, Safran doesn't do this because it takes longer to calculate, and it does some kind of a backwards pass, I think. But if I was to click calculate float and then click run analysis, then what you're going to see is an extra tab once it's finished for my float, and of which I obviously haven't got very much float at all, but we can now see that. So you can either see it obviously for the overall project, or you can see when we run a simulation how much float is there in each of the different phases, or indeed in the different activities. We can see how much wriggle room we might have to play with when we're running a simulation, which I think is potentially quite useful. And I'm sure that in a client contractor relationship, I can imagine that being quite useful as well. If you're a client, you can get your contractors to send their schedules across to you in Safran, then I think that's potentially quite useful when you're starting to analyze where there might be opportunities for time saving and so on. So that's the float side of things. Oh, and the final thing, I don't actually think I've got any progress in this particular. Let's have a look. See. Is it changing? No change at all. So we've always had the ability, or at least I say always, over the last few years, in the cost, when we've been looking at our cost results, we've had the ability to choose whether or not we want to include any actuals. So if, for example, we've got a model where we've got some money that's already been spent, we can choose whether or not we want to include that. And that's always been in the tool, but that's now been added to duration as well. So once you kind of go into execution and you want to be able to choose the difference between maybe the total duration versus the remaining duration, you've now got that little checkbox up there, which if I had any progress, it would help on this particular to demonstrate this particular thing. But it's something that crops up quite a lot, and some clients wanted to have one, some clients wanted to have the other, so now you can choose exactly which one you prefer to see. So that's the changes to the distribution graph tab. I think there's also some kind of minor changes around the iteration data, the step-by-step iteration data. I think there's some more advanced filtering that's been added into here as well. So if you want to start drilling down into the data a little bit more, you've got some more advanced filtering options. But I think for the sake of time, we won't talk about those in too much detail. So let's look at the drivers tab then. So I say the big difference. The main difference here is that we now have the ability to look at our duration drivers as well as the finish date and the cost and the activities. So we've now got the ability to set up duration drivers as well as our finish date and cost drivers. So we can do that in the drivers tab. And a really minor thing, which I'm not sure I've managed to get working particularly well, is that we've also got the ability to put some restrictions in around the maximum width of labels, which is then supposed to wrap the text and so on. But again, pretty minor tweak. Now this next one then, so this is something that I really wanted to happen, but it's one of those things where just because you can doesn't mean that you should, and that's that. Historically, we've been able to change the colors on the drivers tab, and I can't remember which. I think it's like the pale blue or light green that Safran ships with have never quite done it for me. But the sensitivity analysis tab, so the drivers you've been able to customize for quite a long time, but the sensitivity analysis tab you haven't. Whereas now it's been added so that you can use all the various graphing options within Safran to set up different kind of colors for your sensitivity analysis. Now, there we go. Now, this is a kind of like a one of those. Just because you can, it doesn't mean that you should. I was just playing around with some of the graphing options and managed to come up with this absolutely hideous radial gradient finish, I guess. But you can at least now customize these graphs however you want to. Incidentally, there are plenty of other customizations options available that do not look anywhere near as much of a dog's dinner as these ones here. But you've now got the ability to make them look as nice or as ugly as you want to. So scatter plots. Also, may as well let that finish off. There we go. Doesn't that look properly awful? So scatter plot, I don't think there's been any changes at all. PCF, there's a very kind of minor little one here. So I really like the PCF tab. Again, it's one of my favorite things to be shown either during a training course or a sales demonstration. And I've kind of played around with it to show costs and revenues and so on, which is quite nice, because if you're working in a development scenario where you might have some capex kind of upfront spend, but then you're going to start getting revenues coming in, it's quite nice to see at what point we start making some returns, some money on our projects and so on. But the main change within here is that historically, if you're using these overlay, you've got the two different types of graphing. You can either have the side-by-side or the overlaid. I much prefer the overlaid personally, but again, it's kind of horses for courses. But historically, with the overlaid ones, by default, the deterministic would be hidden behind the simulated values. But actually, it's quite nice to be able to show your deterministic values on this probabilistic cash flow, because then anything that's on the bar above that's your exposure beyond your deterministic value. So we can see here, for example, I've got the P100, which is quite extreme, but so the pink. The pink is my deterministic period, and anything beyond that, anything that's shown on here, is my I guess my risk exposure for that particular period, whether we're talking about costs or the revenues or whatever it might be. So it's just something which is new in the new version. The fact that it will, by default, you can now overlay your deterministic over the top. So whereabouts are we? We are doing remarkably well. 10 minutes left, so just a couple of things to talk about on here, and then we can have any questions if indeed there are any. So first of all, again, it's a fairly minor little thing, but historically, once we sent distributions to this comparison chart, we were stuck with whatever the colours were that came through. Whereas now, if we click on them, we can then go and give a different color to the things that we want to see. So we can now color those differently, and we've also got the ability to filter. Now, of course, here I've only got 3 things, so a filter seems like overkill. But if I had lots and lots of different things being lots of different distributions comparing on the same graph, I can now filter on those as well. One thing I haven't checked, actually, I don't think it's in there, is that on this trending view, we can't yet customize these colors here. So if you ever do any trending where you might want to see the performance of your different versions of your schedule over time, this trending is a nice, it flattens out a distribution curve and shows you your focus percentiles, which is a really great way of being able to do assurance on an ongoing project. But you can't, unfortunately, as yet, customize these little things, these little colors over here. But fairly minor issues, it's fair to say, and I think kind of to wrap that up, at least from my perspective, obviously Safran is there's still development going on with it. There's still things that the developers are putting in, but actually for me, this latest release, it really feels like there's just a number of the little gaps that were previously there have really been filled in a really powerful way. So personally, I'm absolutely delighted with this, and I'm really kind of pleased with the direction of travel of the tool. But hopefully this has been a useful session. So I don't know Gustavo, if there's any questions from any of the audience about anything that's been shown so far.
And we didn't get any question. Yeah, and thanks everybody for joining, because yeah, only some AI agents left because I stopped them. So
oh yeah, right. You left.
Yeah, so
Okay,
everybody stayed. So if you guys have any question, and thanks again for staying the whole session, thank you for that. I'm not sure if you have any questions.
30 items in one go. I'm extremely pleased to have actually managed to get them all done. Incidentally, you do have the ability to see these things in the whereabouts are we? In the what's called the customer release notes. So when the software ships, and also on the website, you've got the customer release notes. So you've got a list of these things down here. It talks about all the version histories through all the different releases. And what I've just done is I just kind of collated them together and grouped them by tab. So so if there's no more questions, thank you. Or if there's no questions, thank you very much all for joining. And if you do need anything else, if you want to talk about any of the things that you've seen, ping us a message. Always happy to talk all things Safran. So yeah, but other than that, thank you all. Oh, someone has a question. Someone has a question. Okay, we've got a couple of questions. It looks like have come up now. Gustavo, are you able to read them out?
Yeah, please. Yeah, it says Safran automatically considers remaining duration in the importer schedule. What do you mean by actuals?
Okay, so so let's say you've got some activities which have some activities have completed, some activities have got some progress reported on them, some haven't started yet. Again, this isn't the best model to show it on, but this shows us the total duration for the activity. And historically, there is a, if I just pick a activity, there is a particular tab that says, remaining duration analyzed, I think. Well, this one down here. So once we go into execution, we might report some progress on an activity. And let me see if I can do it live, which is just it's just a recipe for disaster. But let's see if I can just say that maybe I've done maybe 50%. Let's see if this works. So now I've got 6 days remaining, and what activity I'm on, agree scope of work and contract. This is all very much live, so I've got no idea if how this is gonna work, or if it's gonna work, but let's have a little look see. So where was I? Agree scope of work and contract, there we go. And if I go to duration, sorry, okay, so you can see that this that little bar is now showing that I've got some progress reported. And so if I click, so we'll see. Yeah, but not sure if that's changing or not. Yeah, without wanting to embarrass myself by trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong, that checkbox is now allowing us to what should be coming through is then the difference between the progress that's been reported and the remaining. So if we can now show either the estimate at completion, so what's our total project duration, or how much we've still got left to go. So those are that's what that checkbox does. So you've got two different options. So I should probably have set up an example which actually demonstrated that. So I do apologise for not getting around to that beforehand, but hopefully that sort of covers that. But if not, ping me a message and I'll happily set up a little demonstration and just kind of show it with some illustrative data. I think was there another question as well, Gustavo?
Yeah, there's another one, though. It says from Sankey. He says, being a cost control manager, learning Safran and deep diving in risk, will it give me better opportunities? This is more like a conceptual one. Your opinion?
Okay. So I think whilst it's also always important to take into account the bias of the person or who's given you the kind of the news. When you look at the news, you need to take bias into account. And I'm obviously very, very biased because we work extensively with Safran, but I absolutely think so. Whilst it's not been covered, in this particular session, there's all sorts of things that we can do with Safran around making our cost models kind of better. And I think one of the big issues is that if you're looking at costs on a standalone basis, if you're using, I don't know, At Risk or Model Risk or Crystal Ball or some other kind of cost management software, one of the challenges that you've got is that often costs are being driven by the schedule, but actually if you've got cost and schedule separately, it's very hard to reflect that. So in this little model here, I've got a cost, some PMO cost of 3.5 million, and that's actually been linked to something in my schedule, this PMO hammock. This I've got a particular activity down here, wherever it might be, there. And so that's 131 days. But of course, when I then start to run a simulation, that 131 days might change, 150, 139. So it's changing each time we're running a simulation. And actually, if we then link the schedule, whereabouts is it? I've lost my PMO cost. Where has it disappeared to? Where has it gone? There, up at the top. So if we link the cost to the schedule, then what we're able to do, we're able to start putting to simulating such that if an activity takes longer, it's going to cost us more. And then of course, by doing that sort of thing, by having an integrated cost and schedule risk model where we've got cost and schedule in the same place, it opens up a whole load of other things. Now, that's probably beyond the remit of this particular presentation, but certainly if you'd like to explore what that kind of that idea of, or what are the things that we can do as a result of looking at cost and schedule in the same place rather than just schedule on its own, please let me get in touch. Things like the scatter plots, being able to look at the probability of meeting both our cost and our schedule objectives is something which is really powerful. Being able to see the trade-off between cost and schedule, being able to look at, as we saw here, looking at our spend profile over time. Again, this is because we're linking to the schedule. So when we've got a schedule that's moving around and we've got costs that are moving around, we're then able to generate all those things together and see them all in one place. So there's a whole load of reasons why moving towards an integrated cost and schedule risk model is something which opens up lots of benefits. But I think happy to talk about those offline another time if that's all right. So were there any other questions, Gustavo?
The last one, also for Samki, he's asking, what does the 25.1 stands in? Safran Risk 25.1.
Okay, so the 25 is so it used to be version 7 or whatever, and so that first letter there is the year in which the software came out. Now, I appreciate it's now 2026, but the original beta came out back in 2025, and so it's just never the name's never changed. And I think there's actually an article on the Safran website that explains about the version in numbers. But so 25 is this first part is the year it came out, and then this is the release number. So this is the first version of the tool. So I would imagine, for example, that version 25.2 might have some extra features in, but then the final part here, which in my case I've got a 0.1. This is then the kind of like the minor product update version numbers. So the first number is the big version number. The second one is the I guess the patch, and then the third one is the minor little tweaks, etc. Okay, so I can hear children in the background of my house. So at this point, rather than them coming in and disrupting it, I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. Again, please get in touch if you need anything else at all. It's been a pleasure hosting you all. Hopefully it's been a useful session, and hopefully we'll see you around again at some point soon. So thank you very much, and goodbye.